Welcome to It's Just Perfume, a Lucky Scent podcast. My name is Steven Guntarski, and I've been the manager of the two Los Angeles scent bars. Scent bars are the brick and mortar iterations of Lucky Scent for quite a while now. It's been several years. So you can imagine in those years I've had countless conversations with perfume aficionados and collectors and people who just like smelling stuff. And we talk about perfume day in, day out. So when you talk about perfume, you naturally make references to things that we all know. Like, I can smell rose in this. Everyone knows what a rose smells like. But when you really start getting into perfume, you start getting these interesting notes that you might start describing as wet concrete, or I like the warm Xerox machine smell, you know? But the thing is, we know that smell isn't coming from a Xerox machine, and there's no such thing as a wet concrete essential oil. So what we're smelling are various scent molecules that are combined in such a way that they're mimicking the smell of these references. And so, sure, you would talk about aroma chemicals when talking about a Xerox machine, but even something like lily of the valley, which is a real flower, you can't extract the smell of it from traditional extraction methods. There's no lily of the valley essential oil. So even that smell is a composite in perfume. So it smells so natural like a flower, but it's made up of all these different aroma chemicals. So I am here today with Ashley Kessler. Hello, Ashley.
Hi, Steve.
Because you are a perfumer, and I thought you could break some of this stuff down. And let's talk about the nuts and bolts of perfumery, the aroma chemicals that make up so many of the perfumes that we know and love.
Well, this is absolutely my favorite thing to do. And in my practice as a perfumer, getting to know the individual materials is not only indispensable in terms of understanding how to formulate, but it's where most of my inspiration comes from.
That's very interesting. Now, just for a little backstory, I want to turn back the clock nearly 16 years ago when little Steve walks into Scent Bar. It was a very, very small store at the time, and it was down the street from the current Scent Bar. And I wanted to smell all these perfumes that I had seen online on Lucky Scent. And it was to my amazement that there was a brick and mortar store. So I came in, and there you were, behind the counter.
There I was.
I remember our first conversation so well because I was so excited by it. Meeting someone who knew so much about the perfumes that I was smelling that it just really lit off all the lights in my brain, and I was so excited. And I kept coming back to hassle you and talk perfume.
Well, I don't think it was a hassle, Stephen.
So I ended up working there. In fact, I replaced you because you went off and you became a perfumer. Can you please tell us about this journey of becoming a perfumer?
Oh, sure. So for me, it was very much a second or third career. Growing up, I always was creative, and I loved to, get my nose and fingers into clay and smells and drawers and all kinds of things. And I had a sort of background in art and architecture and other things that brought together the two fields, the artistic and the scientific. For me, I loved the balance that struck. But there aren't very many jobs where you get to use both sort of in equal measure.
Yeah.
And so after a bit of a long and winding road through the film industry, I reconsidered. And I was thinking to myself, what am I really passionate about? And I've always wanted to make things. And I've always had a sensitive nose. There's a picture of me at the zoo when I was 3 in the stroller, just sitting there like this the entire time, complaining, stinks. Of course, now stinks is a great thing.
Yeah.
I love stinks.
It's part of your palate.
It is. It definitely is. And kids are the most sensitive. But I had an idea, and I had had a wonderful experience when I was younger. I had a custom bespoke fragrance created for me. And I reached out to that wonderful perfumer, Sarah Horowitz, to ask some questions. because in this community, I think, as we all know, we have been so lucky to experience the generosity of other people and their willingness to share their passion and their wisdom and their insight.
I do have to say that, like you, I've had multiple lives before perfume, and the perfume world is generally so friendly, so accepting, and so generous. It's kind of amazing to see.
And when I started meeting perfumers and people who worked in that world, I had that sense that I found my people.
Yeah.
They'd talk about very easily and very seriously, like talk about the soul and inspiration and passion. And, it was just like their bread and butter. And I just loved it. So I reached out to Sarah and asked her sort of the question of like, is it possible to become a perfumer? I had no idea. It didn't occur to me that that was actually a job.
Yeah.
And she was just so exceptional. And she invited me to come back to her studio and see what she was working on. And before I knew it, I was sneaking off from my actual job to go intern there. And, down the rabbit hole I went.
Yeah.
It just was absolutely addictive and so delightful.
Yeah.
And from there, I went to France to study at the Grasse Institute of Perfumery, which was a fantastic experience. Just to have the opportunity to not only meet people with so much knowledge, but to meet other people, my fellow students, and share a community over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And work and discuss and reflect, because I think our individual understanding of scent is so subjective,
Yes.
right? There's no right way to smell. And so being in community and being able to talk to other people and understand their impressions, whether it's from personal experience or where they've grown up in the world,
Yeah.
it's just, it keeps opening up and broadening our understanding. And so from there, I went to New York and I worked in some of the big boy fragrance houses for a bit.
Yeah.
And eventually decided I wanted to move back to LA where I grew up.
Yeah.
And came back. I happened to come visit you sometime around then.
Mm-hmm.
And I met Saskia Wilson-Brown of the Institute for Art and Olfaction, which had not yet been founded.
Yeah.
And Saskia was a friend of yours as well.
Yeah.
And she and I met and got talking about, why isn't there anything in Los Angeles?
Yeah.
Why isn't there more of the fragrance industry here in LA? And she opened up this amazing nonprofit, and I did a residency there. And that's sort of where my actual professional career started.
It's fantastic. And it's really blossomed. The Institute of Art and Olfaction is so active. They have so many programs going on, and of course their workshops. LA has become this jewel in terms of perfume production and perfume appreciation, and it's very exciting to see and to be part of.
And I think the spirit of Los Angeles is just it's a great fit.
Yeah.
It's like dream it, make it, and see it run off into the world, however it goes. But we're so accepting of that here.
I love that. Yeah. And of course, your background is art and architecture. I remember the very first time that we chatted at Scent Bar when I was a customer, we bonded over that because that's also my background. And I mean, I find as someone who makes stuff, whether it's music or art, I don't make perfume, but I feel the process is actually very similar despite the medium. Do you find that as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't have experience with music, but I do hear all the time, musicians coming to fragrance and finding this amazing overlap. And for me with architecture and space, I actually, when I'm smelling and experiencing and trying to describe what's going on, for me, I often see things dimensionally with shape and with all sorts of other things, with tone, with color, with texture. But for me, every fragrance has a body to it that could actually be, sort of put into three dimensions.
Oh, for sure. I know that when I'm recording a piece of music, I'll start off maybe with a particular sound. Like, I like the sound of a gated reverb on a drum because it's this nice 80s moment. And then with that rhythm, it might lead to the next thing, like a bass line coming in with a lot of chorus effect. And then you build. you basically keep building until the story just kind of starts to emerge before your ears in this case. And I imagine perfume must be like that. So that's why I wanted to get into the building blocks. These are the aroma chemicals that are the building blocks of so many of the perfumes that we wear. But there's one thing I want to talk about, and that is that word aroma chemical, okay?
Yeah.
Because there is, there's a little bit of a stigma with that word chemical. And when people see it, they're thinking, oh my God, I hope I'm not putting on forever chemicals and I'm poisoning myself, etc. Whereas in our reality, in our existence, we consume and are surrounded by chemicals all the time. That's our reality.
My favorite chemical is water.
Love that.
Right? Like when you go and check out the definition of a chemical, it's like we live in chemical structure.
Absolutely.
And so there's so much confusion too. And I mean, it's so wonderful how much information is becoming available. But, the fragrance industry was so secretive for such a long time.
Right.
But, in my working definition, a synthetic, right, an aroma chemical is a single molecule, whereas a natural is like a complex blend of molecules. And you can pluck a single molecule out of, your rose essential oil and you get phenylethyl alcohol.
Right.
Or you can construct it through science
Yes.
to create an identical looking and smelling molecule.
Yeah.
And I just think it's fascinating that sometimes what is more responsible or what's safer is not always what we imagine, right? It's a really complicated discussion about, available resources and waste product and all kinds of unintended consequences, which, is kind of what human beings are about.
Right.
But those synthetics really drive a fragrance in a particular direction, right?
You make a really good point, and that is just because it's derived from nature doesn't necessarily mean that it's better or safer for you. In fact, I guess, can you describe IFRA as a governing body? Basically, they're the ones who decide what materials you can use in perfumery, and this is for Europe. So if you want to sell perfume commercially in Europe, you have to be IFRA compliant, and you have to go by their guidelines. And there are lots of things that they ban. Things like oak moss, which is natural, but I guess it's people have allergic reactions to it. Some people have sensitivity to oak moss. So even though it was such an important component of so many perfumes, you can't use natural oak moss anymore.
Right, but you can use rectified oak moss, where they've identified the molecule that's sort of the offender that tends to, cause irritation, and they've removed it from the natural oak moss. So we can use natural oak moss again.
Fantastic.
Right? You pull out that one molecule and it may smell significantly different, or it may be almost unnoticeable.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
Yeah. And IFRA in America is best practices. So it's not law.
Okay.
And then, of course, in every country, they also have their own regulatory standards that they go by. So in Europe, there's IFRA, but they have additional regulations on top of that.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of it actually has to do with communication around divulging what's in the mix.
Okay.
Which I think is fantastic because as consumers, if you have an issue and you can read a label like we do with food, you can choose to use it or not use it.
Right.
Right? And in that way, we can be less restrictive about what goes in.
Yes.
Because not everybody has an allergy to oak moss.
Right.
So
exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's why when you buy a perfume and you look on the back of the box, it'll say ingredients, and you'll see alcohol denat, which is perfumer's alcohol, and you'll see all of these crazy scientific looking chemical words. And that's kind of daunting because you don't recognize any of these words. Although a lot of these things are in rose and lavender, things that we smell all the time. They just have these very scientific names. So we selected some aroma chemicals that I keep seeing on the back of perfume boxes, and let's go through them because I know they're used in so many perfumes.
they are. And when you see them listed, so I think we're going to talk about linalool today. Linalool is in everything.
Right.
It's in everything that grows. So when you see that listed on absolutely everything on the box. It may be, a synthetic linalool, or it may be a component of any of the natural materials that have been used in that fragrance.
Right.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Okay, Linalool is one we're going to get to. Let's start off with this one, Isoe Super, because I think a lot of people are familiar with Isoe Super because one of the fragrances that we sell on Lucky Scent and at Scent Bar is Molecule 1. Now, famously, Molecule 1 from Eccentric Molecule, there's only one aroma chemical in here, and it's Isoe Super. And it's one of our top sellers. It has been for a long time. So now there's a lore around Isoe Super. And so what is Isoe Super?
Isoe Super is considered an amber synthetic molecule, or a woody amber. It has tremendous use in perfumery these days. You can use a lot of it. It is, however, very sheer, which can make it hard to identify. Are you smelling it now?
Yeah. And you know what? It actually, this strip touched the next strip, which is aldehyde. So I'm smelling
I can't.
it
Those
is
aldehydes
that
will
sheer
come get you.
that it was clobbered by aldehyde.
But so these amber notes have this beautiful sort of mineralic quality to them. For me, the Isoe Super is also very woody.
Yeah.
And it's really a chameleon molecule. So some days when I smell it, it'll smell almost completely like cedar wood.
Yeah.
And other times it'll have this delightful ambery, mineralic saline quality to it. And it'll sort of flit back and forth. And oftentimes when people are smelling it, they'll find it and then it'll disappear, right? And then it'll reappear.
Yes.
It's a little bit of a hide and seek experience, which is amazing because most molecules, right, when we smell them, you get used to it. You stop smelling what's around you. It sort of becomes like ambient noise.
Right.
And Isoe Super is one of those molecules that will disappear from your consciousness, and then all of a sudden it'll just reappear. So it has this kind of tantalizing, flirtatious experience going on.
I love that. In fact, what I tell people is if they're new to Molecule, there's a disclaimer here. I say, you will wear this, you will not smell it on yourself. Don't expect to smell this on yourself. But when you pass people in a parking lot of a supermarket, they will smell you. They will probably come up to you and compliment you on your scent. That is what Isoe Super does. And it really works. I like to put it in clothes because it stays in clothes forever. So if I have it on a jacket and I hang the jacket up in the closet and a week later put it on, oh, hello, Isoe Super, there it is.
That's one of my favorite ways to evaluate materials like that.
Really?
Yeah. On fabric and in a little small space. So a closet's sort of perfect.
Yeah. Now, there is a myth around Molecule 1, or let's just say Isoe Super in general, that it reacts with your pheromones and smells different on everyone. I want you to speak to that for a second.
Well, I don't think scientifically human pheromones are understood in a way that we can really claim anything about that. However, all fragrance interacts with your skin.
Absolutely.
Your skin is just as much an ingredient in the fragrance as the Isoe Super is. And that's why, right, you can try something on and love it, and someone else will try it on, and it smells absolutely garbage on them.
Right.
You know?
That's so true.
So one of the great things, I think, though, about Isoe Super is because it is so sheer, so transparent, that it allows the scent of your skin to really come through.
Yes.
And so your skin becomes more of an active participant in that experience.
That's perfect. I mean, I'm so familiar with this smell because I've sold Molecule 1 for so many years now that I can detect it immediately. So when people say, oh, it smells different on everyone, I'm like, not really. It smells like Isoe Super. I mean, to me, when I smell Isoe Super, it's so recognizable. But I like the idea. And what you say is absolutely, it's true. Everything reacts with your chemistry to some extent, for sure.
Absolutely.
So this perfume I have here is called I Am Trash, Les Fleurs du Déchet, or the flowers of the trash. And this is mostly a fruity scent. In fact, I didn't come up with this because I don't think Isoe Super right off the bat, but a bunch of other people were saying, oh, this is all about Isoe Super. So voila. The name's pretty funny. It's referring to pretty trash, like apple peels and maybe discarded flowers. It's not like rotten trash.
Get that gorgeous, juicy, citrusy note up top.
Yeah. And you know what's funny? When I handed it over to you, I smelled the Ice Super. It was like a cloud that came over to me, like in a Bugs Bunny cartoon.
For me, these amber molecules, as much as I smell them, I feel them.
Okay.
It feels like a little staticky sparkle, right? So in the front of my face, it kind of like little glints, like if you're looking at a ocean, right? And you see those little glints of sunlight on the tops of the waves.
Yeah.
It feels exactly like that. It moves.
Oh, yes. I love that.
And so even though there's this sort of, fruity, citrusy character coming forward, at the end of the inhale is when you feel that Ice Super.
Yeah,
and
you're
for
getting
me,
scintillating dappled light.
Ice Super also smells like a brand new pair of white leather Reeboks.
Love that smell.
There's that, those wonderful industrial, the plasticky, off-gassy tones.
Yeah.
And then the smell of the leather, but clean, perfectly clean leather.
Yeah. I have to make a confession, and I know it makes Ice Super sound very not glamorous, but when I was a little kid, I loved the smell of Ajax cleansing powder. So I would sprinkle it into the toilet bowl and rub, and it had a really beautiful smell. I'm not sure if it was Ajax or Comet, but when I started getting used to Ice Super, I kept smelling that. Do you think it's possible that Comet was actually scented with Ice Super? Okay.
What year was Ice Super created?
I don't know. So,
but the texture, right? I use that reference to describe the texture of a lot of molecules, right? That sort of abrasive but pleasantly abrasive.
Yes.
And with all the amber molecules, it's a question of, is it a pleasantly abrasive or is it an aggressively abrasive, right? And depends on where it lands for you. It may be lovely and it may be terrible.
Yeah. I mean, for the Ajax or Comet, it's a smell that I loved as a kid. In fact, I loved those cleansing smells a little too much. It was a little bit of an issue, but that's another story. I love it. So that strip of Ice Super was a little bit contaminated with aldehyde. I didn't realize how strong aldehyde was, so let's smell it on its own. And famously, people talk about Chanel No. 5 as being the reference for aldehyde. Now, there's more than one type of aldehyde. So which aldehyde are we talking about here?
So are we smelling C12MNA?
I believe so.
Yeah. So in perfumery, we use anything from aldehyde C7 up to C12MNA. And then there are some others that aren't numbered quite the same way, like mandarin aldehyde. And they sort of exist on a spectrum for me. They have an odd contrast between something oily and fatty and waxy and citrusy, sometimes even to the rancid side of those things, and this other sharp, fresh, metallic note. For me, when you go higher up to the numbers, it becomes more to the fresh metallic side and less to the powdery, fatty side of things.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a little bit more pleasant.
Yeah.
We have, and of course, Chanel No. 5 was a mistake. The person compounding the formula misread the dilution and added it at a much higher concentration than it normally would have been used at, and than the perfumer even specified. But so many sort of trends in fragrance come from taking a material that only is used in trace amounts and saying, hey, this is fantastic, let's let it come front and center.
Yeah.
Which is also what happened with Ice Super, right?
Right. Yes, absolutely. I think I read that the aldehyde in Chanel No. 5 is supposed to reference Siberian snow. We're supposed to be smelling that ice and snow. And again, it's all about light, isn't it? And it does something very specific in Chanel No. 5, as it does in any. I think it is very glinting and metallic, this particular aldehyde.
Absolutely. And of course, we have a lot of associations with soap.
Yeah.
And this is something I'm actually still trying to unravel.
Yeah.
Whether or not there is a soapy quality to aldehydes, or if I'm just remembering the smell of the fragrances that were in soaps.
Yes.
Because for sure, when I was growing up, dish soap was very aldehyde C12.
Yes. Yes. It's funny you say that because I made this revelation a few weeks ago because I was wearing this vintage perfume and it smelled like a big old powder puff, like something that would have been popular in the 50s and 60s. And I thought, wow, this smells like powder. And it just dawned on me, no, that powder smelled like perfume. Everything was perfumed. And the fashion for the time was a patchouli-centric chypre. That's what the powder puff was scented like.
Yeah.
So now when I smell those kinds of perfumes, I'm like, that's a powder puff. But no, it smells like the perfume
In the powder puff.
In the powder puff.
Exactly. And sometimes those associations are so close that we can't ever quite unravel them.
Right. But you brought up soap. And the fragrance that we want to talk about to illustrate this particular aldehyde is Bambini soap from Villa Herbatium. Because it's true, you get a lot of aldehyde into a fragrance, it's going to smell soapy. But in the most beautiful way. I love this stuff. Check that out.
So what happens here is really fantastic. For me, aldehydes are terrorists.
Okay.
I'm very sensitive to them. And so for me, they're very unpleasant. I know just as many people who smell them and it's delightful.
Yeah.
And I think we all have kind of maybe a category or two of fragrance where we're really challenged by it.
Yeah.
But when you bring that super sharp, bright, fresh aldehyde, which normally for me feels like having a pin shoved into my sinus.
Right.
With these sweet, powdery undertones.
Yeah.
And it transforms into something completely different. And it strikes just that right balance. And when you have two materials that are both really strong, as these powdery heliotropin notes are, and the aldehydes, it's like two people having a very well-matched argument, you know?
It's perfectly balanced.
They're both loud and individually, you know, but when they're going up against each other, they find this harmony and it can just sort of really fill a room.
Yeah, I love that. And with this one, because it smells so much like soap, it's called Bambini soap. It reminds me of those little seashell soaps that are in the guest bathroom. But I mean, I'm a little bit older than a lot of people listening. So this is what I grew up with. And I know that people don't have these soaps in their guest bathrooms anymore. But you know what I'm talking about.
So, Stephen, when I was a kid, you were sprinkling Comet into the toilet. And I was going back to this box of fancy guest soaps in my parents' bathroom.
Yeah.
And they looked like and smelled like chocolate.
Oh, my God.
But you know what? They didn't taste like chocolate. It didn't stop me from going back again and again because, right, it was like, but it smells like chocolate. It looks like chocolate. It smells like chocolate. It's going to taste good. No, it tastes like soap.
Yeah, little Ashley's like, if I keep eating it, it will taste like chocolate at some point.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I would have eaten it too. Trust me. Speaking of edible and delicious, this is ethyl maltol. And by the way, all of these vials here come from Perfumer's Apprentice. You can go and buy these. It's from a kit. I think it's called the Appreciation Kit or something like that. And they're not pure, neat aroma chemical. They have been diluted to something workable. So if you get this kit and you have all these vials, it actually comes with little pipettes and little empty vials. You can start making your own perfume. You just take a few drops of this, a few drops of that, and see what you come up with. This, however, did not come in the kit, ethyl maltol, and its form is a crystal. So I suppose you need to dissolve this in perfumer's alcohol.
You do. You do. And it's actually easier to smell, which is curious. It happens with a lot of molecules at a lower concentration.
Okay.
A lot of things actually become more available to our noses.
Yeah.
And just a word of advice, pure aroma chemicals and even pure essential oils, right, are incredibly strong.
Yeah.
When we're dealing with perfume, we're only ever experiencing it in an application, right?
Yeah.
So eau de parfum is like 20 to 25% fragrance oil
Yeah.
in alcohol.
Yeah.
And in a soap, it's maybe, 1 or 2% fragrance oil. So
Yeah.
when you get into smelling pure essential oils and pure aroma chemicals, in the world of fragrance, we're never experiencing that.
Yeah.
So exercise extreme caution.
Yeah.
They can really be exceptionally kind of challenging.
Yes.
And I remember I put my nose, curiously right into a bottle of aldehyde, which is maybe also why I have such an issue with it, because my first experience of it on its own, right, was straight in. And it was C10, aldehyde C10, and I couldn't smell anything other than aldehyde C10 for 3 or 4 days.
You were literally burned by that experience.
It was an urban apocalypse in my nose, and it wouldn't go away. So have fun, explore, play.
Yeah.
Diluted materials are definitely the way to go.
Definitely. Because from Perfumer's Apprentice, you can buy, let's say you're a budding perfumer and you actually need the pure aroma chemical, because you just need like one little milli drop of something. But don't start off that way. Start off with this kit, because they're diluted to a very workable level to either smell and appreciate or start dabbling with.
Absolutely.
But this beautiful ethyl maltol crystal, I open this and burnt sugar. That's what I smell. Mm-hmm. Now this, especially now, is in everything, because we're still riding this gourmand trend. It's been huge for the past couple of years at least. Mm-hmm. So if you want something that's cupcake, that's a delicious pistachio pudding, chances are it's going to have ethyl maltol in there.
Absolutely. And of course, I think Angel maybe was the fragrance that first used such a big dose of ethyl maltol that it became something we know and love.
Oh, beautiful. Angel. And also, of course, pink sugar. Mm-hmm. In fact, when I smelled this on its own, I thought pink sugar.
Well, and that's so fun, too, when you get into smelling individual materials. So the aldehyde C12 we just smelled, cilantro smells like aldehyde C12. Oh. So it's, when you start getting to know these on their own, you start being able to find and locate them in fragrances, in foods, and you can be like, I smell cilantro. There's aldehyde C12 in there.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Which is also maybe why people think it tastes like soap.
Yeah.
Some people.
Of course. Oh my God, I'm learning so much from talking to you. This is incredible.
So much fun.
There are so many fragrances that we could have pulled today to illustrate ethyl maltol, like Acqua e Zucchero from Perfume. That's a very obvious use of this material. But I wanted to smell something that is a less obvious example of ethyl maltol. Mm-hmm. And this is the iconic Baccarat Rouge from Baccarat Rouge 540 from Maison Francis Kurkdjian. What a huge phenomenon this fragrance is. It's so beautiful. Everyone knows this scent. Anyone who's kind of mad about perfume knows Baccarat Rouge, of course. There's so many copycat scents now that are copycats of this. Now, I've talked to some perfumers about this fragrance, and they say the formula of this is shockingly simple.
Yeah.
There aren't that many notes to Baccarat Rouge 540, but ethyl maltol is one of the important notes of this. What do you think of Baccarat Rouge?
I think, it's so attractive, right?
It is very. That
Ambroxan note, which I'm just a very predictable fan of. If it has the Ambroxan in it, I love it. What I think is so interesting about this is the oak moss in it, right? Is such a traditional smell. It's the basis of, like you were saying, the Chypre family. But mostly that has these very old-fashioned connotations.
Yeah.
Right? Barbershop, soaps and things like that. But here, because it's so simple and sort of modernist, that oak moss note stands out while everything else is sort of very clear and sharp. And that allows it to feel very contemporary. And the sweetness of the ethyl maltol here also creates this familiarity, right?
Yeah.
We don't like things that are unfamiliar, right? Our biology, we're wired to use our sense of smell as an early warning system. You know, from a distance, is that a threat? Is that something I can move towards, right? Is it poisonous? Is it edible? Is that going to come and eat me? Or is that my potential mate, right? And we make those snap decisions. First moment. And when you have something that's a sweet note, right? And we know sweet things are good. We eat them all the time. We're super familiar with it. You play on people's familiarity, and it's like the doors just open instantly. And then as a perfumer, if you play a little bit with what is familiar, you can introduce things that are very unfamiliar. And I love that. I love that as a segue to sort of change people's concepts and experiences.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I find Baccarat Rouge to be very warm, very comforting. And I like to describe the scent as having a low center of gravity. So when it enters a space, it just holds itself together and it stays there. It stays put. So that's why when someone is wearing this fragrance and they leave the room, they're gone, but Baccarat Ghost is still very much there for the next hour.
Absolutely. This is mostly base notes in here.
Yeah.
This doesn't have that typical structure with a huge top that then fades. And so it's a little bit, it's stealth a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, you get that sweet sparkle.
Yeah.
But then everything else is low.
Yeah.
Right? And for me, it's almost the end of the inhale that I smell most of the fragrance.
You know what? That explains why so many customers, when they don't know Baccarat Rouge, but they've heard of it, and they come in and they want to smell it, they'll smell the strip and they'll say, oh, I can barely smell it. It's really weak. And I say it's actually so strong. If you wear this and step outside, they're going to smell you across the street. But it's because of the lack of top notes. So there's very little information at first sniff.
Yeah.
It all comes later.
And when you leave those big molecules out for a long time, they become easier to smell.
Yeah.
But I do find if you breathe in really slowly and gently, at the top of the breath, right, just as you get to the end, all of a sudden there's all this information that comes from those really heavy notes. And of course, if you put a little heat on it, right, which is what our skin does, that's going to open everything up.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think, with our molecule 01 was the first sort of very bold move to say, you know, a single molecule is a scent.
Yes.
And it doesn't need a top, a middle, and a base note.
Yeah.
And I think Baccarat Rouge sort of has walked in that path.
Yeah.
To really reject these traditional assumptions about how to construct a fragrance.
Yeah. That's super interesting. Next up is Linalool. You mentioned Linalool, and I feel that I have just a very rudimentary understanding of this aroma chemical. For me, I know that Linalool is in the smell of lavender, and it's in the smell of bergamot. And as I tell customers all the time when they say, oh, I like bergamot, bergamot's literally in every perfume. Yeah, you can count on it being there. It's a top note. It's a wonderful citrus, goes away really quickly. But that's why I thought Linalool is on the back of every perfume box, because every perfume has either lavender and or bergamot. But you're saying it's in so much more than just those two things.
Yeah, I find when I'm evaluating that material, it's almost impossible to describe it with anything other than naming all of the things that smell like linalool.
Okay.
Right? And that's everything from citrus. Bergamot's a great example. It's full of linalool and linalool acetate. But anything green is full of linalool. Flowers, when we talk about lavender being floral, right, we're saying it smells like linalool. And when we say floral, but we don't really have any more specific kind of description, it's not rose, it's not jasmine, it's linalool. Right? And so that freshness that we find in the citrus and the florals and the greens, it's linalool.
This is so pleasing to smell.
Well, and of course for you, isolated, it's pleasing because you love those household cleaners. So the funny thing about this, right, is that it's used a lot in kitchen fragrances, right, and cleansers because we have the association of it being nature, of things that are fresh and growing.
Yeah.
However, if you're more of a indoor cat city person than you are an outdoor cat nature person,
yes,
your references for linalool may be industrial cleaners rather than the smell of flowers in the field.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people, when they smell this, and this was my experience, It smells really industrial to them. But when you add it to a blend, all of a sudden it creates this incredibly lifelike, natural feeling.
Now, when I smelled Linalool for the first time on its own, on paper, Fruit Loops, that's what came to mind. It's such a specific flavor and smell. So now when I pick up a little bit of Fruit Loop in a perfume, I assume there's Linalool. But, I mean, chances are there's Linalool in it anyway because it's in everything. A really beautiful fragrance that so many of our customers are excited about is London Fog from Brandt. And
This is a new one for me.
yeah, it's okay. So you can imagine a little bit of a Earl Grey tea situation. Obviously, bergamot is such an important part of the Earl Grey aroma. Check that out.
This is the part of perfumery that's not great for camera and podcast because it's slow, right? And to really experience a scent, we have to sit with it for a bit. There are those immediate reactions, but then there's everything that comes after.
Yeah.
And that's like worlds just appearing.
Yeah. I find that this fragrance especially unfolds slowly. It really is drinking some Earl Grey tea on a rainy day by the window and just going into a reverie. It's that kind of a fragrance.
And it has that cool effect on the top.
Yeah.
Funny though, for me, it kind of feels like sunshine. Which is sort of the opposite, right, of the rainy London idea. But so frequently, a single molecule can have these contradictory associations.
Yeah.
It can be wet and dry at the same time, hot and cold. I love that fragrance can contain all that contrast.
Yeah. Do you find as a perfumer that when you're creating new compositions that you pretty much put linalool in everything?
Not necessarily. If you're using natural materials from anywhere in the sort of non-resin, anywhere in the floral or citrus world, it's going to contain some linalool.
Yeah.
But I do add linalool very frequently to a composition. Not always.
Yeah.
Not always. But it will bring that freshness and it will kind of bridge between the top and the base very nicely. There's like a hint of what do the English call it, a biscuit too here in the back.
I like me a bicky every now and then.
Yeah, beautiful.
This is Ambroxan. I'm familiar with Ambroxan because molecule 2 from Eccentric Molecule is just Ambroxan, and perfumer's alcohol and water. So that's what I smell when I smell Ambroxan. But again, this is used in so many compositions.
It's sort of the hallmark of chic perfumery now.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that aldehyde just wandered everywhere, everywhere. It's such a bully. All right, let's dip again.
I actually had a college professor who I don't know what he wore, and that's unlike me because usually I would ask my teachers, what fragrance are you wearing? Or I would just know it from going to department stores. And I knew when he was in the building because I smelled Ambroxan. And God knows, this is going to be that thing that I will never know. Obviously, I'm never going to contact him because that would be a little bit freaky after all these years.
So this is absolutely my favorite material.
Ambroxan is.
Yeah, I have such a predictable response to it.
Yes.
I actually make a little bit of a sound whenever I smell it. It's that.
What is it about it that you love so much?
So for me, it's easiest to describe Ambroxan with images. So, and there's two for me.
Yeah.
The first is being on a Mediterranean beach that's, lined in limestone cliffs, right? And the limestone has that light, chalky color to it, embedded with flecks of mica, right?
Yes.
And you get those glittery sparkles. And for me, it's fresh seawater baking in the sun on that lovely, warm cliff of limestone.
Who doesn't want to be there? That sounds amazing.
And then it takes me to something much more human. And it smells like fresh sweat dripping off of a very finely sculpted human body. Not body odor, not the funk, just that very first moment of perspiration has this wonderful salinity to it and sparkle and texture. And for me, the texture feels like the finest grit sandpaper, right? That it's scratchy, but you keep wanting more of it.
Yeah. So would you say that Ambroxan makes a fragrance sexy?
For me, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe shared by a few people out there.
Okay.
But for me, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, I don't know. I'm very amateur when it comes to this, but I think about Ambroxan like musk, that it's one of those materials that just holds the fragrance together. Would you say that's true?
It is, except it's somehow the perfect inverse of musk.
Okay. In what way?
So for me, musk is all about a light fullness, right? It's opaque, it's soft, but it feels, you can feel it like a volume, right? Like a cotton ball being stuffed into your sinuses in the most loving, gentle way, but it has this uniform fullness that seems to emanate outwards in this very lovely, lovely puff. Ambroxan has nothing in the center. Ambroxan is all about what appears at the edges,
Right.
which is very challenging, especially as a young perfumer, because if you love the smell of Ambroxan, you can keep putting more Ambroxan into a formula, but you don't get more of an effect. And if you start mixing it with things that are more opaque, it seems to kind of disappear. The truth is it doesn't. It's there, but you don't notice it as much. It sort of exists like a halo around everything else that's happening in the fragrance.
Here is Comète Paradis from Par Mois de Parfum. And I believe you chose this from the different ones that we presented to you as being very Ambroxan forward.
Did.
So you instantly responded to this fragrance.
I mean, that whole set was great for me.
Yeah.
What I really love about this one is there's a little perfumer's trick in here, which is if you use a little something sweet, it amplifies that Ambroxan smell, the way they play off of each other. And so if you're always hounding after more Ambroxan like I am, using a little bit of a sweet note provides that perfect contrast.
I love that. Sweet note with a halo of Ambroxan. Beautiful.
And I like the toastiness of this fragrance. The Ambroxan starts to feel like crystallized sugar, you know, on whatever that edible sweetie is.
Yeah. An interesting take on gourmand. So I have to tell you that I have a bit of a soft spot for Hedione, so much so that I actually had a music project going on for a while called Hedione. And the way I thought of it was it's this beautiful, delightful, to me, it smells like sunlight in the morning, really. And I thought, okay, I want to have music that sounds like sunlight in the morning. Let's call it Hedione. I abandoned that, by the way. So if you want to call yourself Hedione and make music, go for it. But let's smell this stuff. And I think when I first smelled it, I had this, you had mentioned about how little kids smell things really, I don't know.
Acutely.
Acutely,
Yeah.
definitely. That was certainly true for me. And I thought maybe it's just because you don't have these references yet. So the first time you experience something, like I remember the first time I ate an ice cream sandwich. I'll never forget it. It blew my world. But it's the first time I ever had one, and it was never as good as that first time. So I remember as a little kid seeing forsythia in our backyard, and it would just get yellow buds in very early spring when it was still cold, especially in the morning. And when I smell Hedione, I think of that moment. And I have a perfumer friend. We were talking about Hedione, and when I dabbled a little bit in perfume making. By the way, it's not as easy as you think. It's pretty tricky. But my thing was, keep adding Hedione. And when I talked to this friend who's a perfumer, he said, well, that's a well-known thing. If you want it a little bit better, keep adding the Hedione until it starts smelling good.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just pretty in a bottle.
Yeah.
You know, sheer, super translucent. A lot of these molecules we're looking at today are super translucent.
Yeah.
Which can make them hard to necessarily, or not necessarily, hard to pick out, right? But when I smell this, it's just like a juicy hint of grapefruit, followed by this lovely, sunlight comes to mind for me too. This lovely sheer floralcy in the jasmine direction. It's a jasmine note.
Definitely.
And then on the back, there's a little bit of something that smells like celery.
Yeah.
And ever so slightly, a little bit of sour milk. But
Okay.
not refrigerator sour milk.
Right.
More like infant spit up sour milk. The sweetest, nicest form of sour milk.
So innocent, but a little bit
Little bit.
human.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
But it just brings lightness and diffusion.
Definitely.
And you can use a lot of it in a fragrance. It can really kind of provide either a canvas to work on, right? Where it's this perfect background that you've prepared and then you can just beautifully hang things off of it.
Yeah.
Or the other way around, you can have a much more complicated or challenging construction and you pour the Hedione in and all of a sudden everything is just beautiful.
Yeah. This fragrance here, I love for so many reasons. It's called Tonka Bodycon, and it's from Pierre Guillaume. And when you smell this, the main thing you're smelling is not Hedione. But I love this scent because almost like a piece of music where you can barely hear a flute playing something very, very high. That's what the Hedione is doing in this fragrance.
Absolutely.
Oh, beautiful. Fruity, spicy. I compare this to Angel Share by Kilian, although I call this the daytime lighter version. It has those feels of apple pie spices.
But so somehow sheer.
Yeah.
And that's that Hedione.
Yeah.
You know, it's just almost as if these other things are just floating in a lake of this lovely floralcy.
Yeah.
There's a classic fragrance, the Eau Sauvage, the Dior fragrance for men, that also is just transformed by the Hedione in it. You know, and it's more of like a masculine leathery, and you wouldn't necessarily think that you would put something so pretty into a masculine fragrance like that, but it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Basically, the perfumer's trick, like you said, is
keep adding the Hedione.
Keep adding the Hedione.
Definitely. I've been wearing so much of Menthe la Jolie from Asté du Villat, and when you smell it, it's clearly mint and basil, but I detect, again, that little bit of sunlight. So I'm going to say there's probably Hedione in there. And when you read the list of notes for that fragrance, it says jasmine. Now, when you look at Lucky Scent or Fragrantica or some other resource, and you're looking at notes of perfume, they're not going to list the aroma chemicals. They're going to say things like jasmine, rose, lavender. But the way I think of it is when they say jasmine, they might be referring to the use of Hedione in
Absolutely, absolutely. Marketing language is so different from ingredient language.
Yes, exactly.
And, God bless it.
Yeah.
It can take us there and give us context. But I was so disappointed when I found out that those things aren't actually necessarily, or maybe ever, in a fragrance.
Yeah, absolutely. They're more like tasting notes.
Yes.
So if you go to a wine tasting and it says there's cigar box, there's actually not cigar box in that wine. But, it's a note to look out for. Same with perfumery.
Absolutely. So pretty. And I feel like the tonka element of this has that sort of almost vaguely coconut cream. And that just plays off of that milky note in the Hedione so well.
Yeah.
So pretty.
This is definitely a staff favorite, Tonka Bodycon.
Yeah. Great name, too.
Yes, I agree. This next aroma chemical is for the men, and this is Dihydro myrcenol. So, okay. Now, fougere is a style of fragrance that is kind of that barbershop traditional masculine smell. And the main things in a fougere would be lavender. That's what it's based on. Coumarin, which is that smell of tonka and hay, and geranium, other notes. But something happened, and I'm going to say maybe in the 80s, where dihydromyrcenol came in and it bumped out lavender, and it became the new focus of the fougere style.
I don't know if this was the first fragrance to overdose the dihydromyrcenol, but my junior high school world smelled like Drakkar Noir. So when I smell it, it is 8th grade school bus.
Yes. Well, I contributed to that. That was my first fragrance, Drakkar Noir.
So for me, is this appealing to you?
Well, kinda. It smells like detergent. Really.
Yeah.
It smells maybe like Tide, or Emmy was saying a little bit of a Windex note.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That ammonia quality.
Yeah, but the thing is, you pick up any department store masculine, Sauvage, for example, Bleu de Chanel, probably, Cool Water, obviously, this beautiful wake-up world. There's so much dihydromyrcenol, but it's constructed so beautifully, so it doesn't really have that detergent-like smell that you get when you smell it straight.
This is definitely playing onto the nicer side. A lot of linalool here, too.
Okay.
The title Wake Up is a perfect description of dihydromyrcenol.
Yeah.
For me, it's a slap in the face.
Yeah.
You know, it has that super aggressive floral freshness.
Yes.
But with that abrasive cleanser quality to it that almost makes, like, it takes me to walking into an indoor pool where there's so much chlorine that you just walk in the door and your eyes start to sting. For me, that's dihydromyrcenol.
That's pretty great.
But it's very nicely balanced
Yeah,
here.
definitely. Wake Up World, when I first started wearing this fragrance, it brought me to a specific time and place. For me, the 90s. This is not from the 90s. It's just from a few years ago. But it was bringing me back to like Banana Republic, like the masculine fragrances. And I don't mean this as a criticism. I love that period of fragrance. And the dihydromyrcenol basically is evident in any kind of fragrance that was marketed as sporty.
Yes.
You know, so if you have something that's active and sporty and obviously marketed for men, it's going to be all about dihydromyrcenol.
Absolutely. It's the signature.
Yeah.
My favorite is the Gaultier Le Male.
Le Male.
Because you have, it's like you take Tonka Bodycon and Wake Up World and you put them together.
Yes.
Right? And for me, the dihydromyrcenol there like lifts that orange blossom note.
Yes.
And it has that lovely coumarinic base.
Yes.
And so for me, it's like the right volume of dihydromyrcenol.
Yes. There's a nice little bit of powder in Le Male. It's a very sexy fragrance and it's quite opaque.
Yes.
I love that stuff. We saved the monster for last. Okay, so Norlimbanol, it's kind of divisive because let's face it, it's in a lot of fragrances. And Claire was recently in New York. She said wherever she walked around on the streets, she smelled nothing but Norlimbanol. It's in so many fragrances that are incredibly popular right now. And I think that this aroma chemical turbocharges a scent. It brings the volume to 11.
So I call this a super amber,
Yeah.
right? So however retiring and elusive an Ambroxan or an Isoe super might be, not the super ambers.
No. I barely touched and at this point in this, it's a cool day, it kind of solidified. It's more like a crystal, but it's very there. I barely put any on here.
This is not diluted.
Oh, there you go. It's pure.
Although, this is actually, it's so aggressive, right? Which can do amazing things in a fragrance. However, on its own, it is simply like having a very splintery piece of wood hammered into my brain. It is so sharp and so lifted, right?
Yeah.
Which, think about that. And you get these tremendous possibilities.
Yes.
And this, sort of, lovely, woody, burnt metal, burnt tobacco quality here.
Yeah.
But it also just takes me to, if you've ever choked on a saltine cracker.
Yes.
Like that level of dry grittiness.
Yes,
right?
yes.
With the Norlimbanol. But you can use this, it's being used in a very, characteristic way now.
Yes.
Right? You smell it a lot of places. You can also use it in very microscopic doses.
For sure.
And it'll have all of the effect of those descriptions,
Yes.
but you won't actually smell it,
Right.
which is fascinating.
Yeah.
And so I can kind of use it to lift up that Ambroxan quality that I
Right.
like. As like a booster.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I always thought that on its own, Norlimbanol smells like isopropyl alcohol. So before you get an injection at the doctor's,
yeah.
they're going to rub a little bit of that alcohol on your arm. That's what it smells like to me.
Yeah.
It's very distinctive. I was showering after swimming at the gym, and someone in the gym had something with Norlimbanol because all I could smell was not perfumer's alcohol. All I could smell was rubbing alcohol. And I thought, who's using rubbing alcohol in the locker room? This is so strange. I'm pretty sure it's a shower gel that was just loaded up with Norlimbanol.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've smelled some incense fragrances that are combining the olibanum, the frankincense, with just a touch of Norlimbanol. And what happens is it gives it a glint of light. And I actually think of that incense sensor. I can actually smell and see that metal. And I love it when it's used like that. I think it's really interesting.
I lean more towards loving it that way too. I think, if a material is going to have a personality, Norlimbanol is a real asshole. Just
okay.
so brash.
This is number 4, Après l'amour from Thomas Kosmala. This has a lot of Norlimbanol. And I like to show this to people because there is definitely a customer for this. We have some people who want something that's going to be at top volume all day into the night. There are not many things that can do that, but Norlimbanol can carry through.
Yeah, you want to make a confident statement of being present.
Yeah.
This will, oh my God.
Yeah. This is going to the club. Yeah. If you want to get noticed, you're going to put on something like Après l'amour. And I mean, when I smell that, I get some of the things that are going on in Baccarat Rouge, which makes me think maybe there's some ethyl maltol in there as well. But you definitely get that electricity of the Norlimbanol. So you're going to be wearing this one today, I can see.
Everything in the right dosage, right? When we have a scent, we all have a threshold. And if we go over the threshold, we hate it.
Yes.
But under it, you do the animalic notes like that, like civet.
Yeah.
And we love a tiny bit of the smell of rot decay.
Yeah.
Just in the right dosage.
Definitely.
And the Norlimbanol, well.
There's an aroma chemical called, people refer to it as IBQ or isobutylquinoline, and it's used in leather type smells. And I always tell people, I hate IBQ. It's awful. But a lot of my favorite fragrances have it. And I'm going to admit that right now because I see it or I can smell it and it's barely there, but it does something super important and I know it's necessary. So, okay, I hate IBQ and yet I wear it every day.
I use Norlimbanol in an obscene number of my perfumes.
There you go.
It's really useful. It's a really useful tool.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't like celery. I would never pick up a stalk of celery and start munching on it. That's my nightmare. But I know that if you grate it and put it into a tomato sauce, it lifts the flavor of the tomato. So I'm going to put away my celery phobia and just embrace it. It's necessary in that composition.
People ask me a lot, what do you like? What are your favorites? And the longer I do the work, the more it's just a question of, having so many colors in your palette, right? They're all useful and they can all be used in a beautiful way. It's a little bit more like being an orchestra leader, right?
Yeah.
That they exist, they have their tones and their sounds, and you're just hopefully encouraging them to come together in the right moments and in the right intensity.
I love that. Flute, bring it up a little bit. Trombone, calm down a little bit.
Yeah.
Got it.
But the conductor fundamentally doesn't have control
Yeah.
over what's being played.
Yeah. Ashley, this has been not only so informative, but so fun. I think
fun.
any perfume geek, ourselves included,
Guilty.
will go down this rabbit hole. Get this kit from Perfumer's Apprentice. It's going to really open your nose and your eyes to perfume, and you're going to smell things in an informed and enriching way.
Absolutely. And I think even if you're not into practicing perfumery and you don't have any curiosity about constructing a perfume, doing the work of smelling and sitting with your own experience, right? We live so much in our heads, right? And one of the things I love about perfumery is that it brings you into the present and into your body and all of your other senses. And it can really heighten your experience of life in general.
Amen. I love that. On that note, thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.